The awakening of the living God. The golden sun slowly crept over the horizon of ancient Thebes, spreading its light across the endless sands of Egypt. The first rays touched the towering obelisks, the statues of the gods, and the shining walls of the pharaoh's palace, the very heart of an empire that ruled the world 5,100 years ago. Inside the grand palace, silence reigned. Every servant, every guard, every priest stood motionless. For this was no ordinary morning. This was the awakening of a god. The pharaoh, believed to be the living son of Ra, the sun god, was stirring from his divine rest. To the people of Egypt, his very breath gave life to the land. The Nile flowed because he willed it. The sun rose because his spirit commanded it. The wind itself bowed before his power. As the first light entered his royal chamber, the high priest of Amun whispered a prayer in the sacred tongue, calling upon the gods to bless their ruler once more. Incense filled the air, its sweet, heavy fragrance swirling around golden walls inscribed with hieroglyphs of past glories. The pharaoh's bed was no simple resting place. It was a throne of carved ebony, gilded with gold and guarded by statues of falcons and lions, symbols of divine strength and eternal power. Two royal attendants stepped forward, bowing deeply until their foreheads touched the floor. They dared not look upon the face of their master. One carried a golden basin filled with the sacred waters of the Nile, while the other held perfumed oils from distant lands. The high priest began the morning ritual, the purification of the divine body. Drops of water were poured over the pharaoh's hands and feet as the priest recited ancient words that had been spoken for thousands of years. It was said that each drop carried the blessings of the gods, washing away the touch of mortality and restoring divine perfection. When the ritual ended, the pharaoh rose, tall, graceful, and silent. The air itself seemed to change as he stood, his presence radiating authority. His attendants clothed him in linen robes so fine they shimmered like sunlight. Around his neck was placed the broad collar of gold and lapis lazuli, a symbol of eternal rule. Then came the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, the white and red crowns combined, representing his dominion over all lands. Upon it coiled the sacred uraeus, the golden serpent of protection. It was said that any enemy who dared to look upon the pharaoh with evil intent would be struck down by the serpent's fiery breath. As the pharaoh prepared himself for the day, the palace came alive with movement. Servants rushed through the corridors carrying scrolls, food, and offerings. Musicians began to play soft melodies on harps and flutes. The air was alive with anticipation. The god-king was about to step into the mortal world once more. The pharaoh's breakfast was unlike any meal of common men. On a golden table were laid dates, figs, honey, freshly baked bread, and meat roasted with herbs. Wine from the delta gleamed in crystal cups. Each dish was first blessed by the priests before it touched the royal lips. For if the pharaoh was divine, then even his food must be touched by holiness. As he dined, a royal scribe entered the chamber. In his hands he carried scrolls of papyrus, filled with records of the kingdom's daily life, harvest reports, temple offerings, border patrol updates, and messages from distant provinces. The pharaoh's rule extended far beyond the palace walls. Every decision he made shaped the fate of millions. He listened in silence as the scribe read aloud, "The floods of the Nile have begun to rise, my lord. The farmers await your blessing before they plant their crops." The pharaoh nodded. "The gods are pleased," he said softly. "Tell the people that Ra's light will bless the fields this season." Then came the report from the southern frontier. "My lord, the Nubian tribes have sent gifts, and seek audience with your majesty." The pharaoh's eyes, calm yet sharp as a hawk's, met the scribes. "They may approach. Egypt is generous to those who bow, and merciless to those who don't." Even in his daily routine, the pharaoh's every word carried the weight of divine law. No decree could be questioned. No order could be disobeyed. To defy him was to defy the gods themselves. Outside, in the palace courtyard, soldiers trained in perfect rhythm. The sound of bronze weapons clashing echoed through the stone walls. Beyond them, the city of Thebes was already awake. Merchants opened their stalls, priests led prayers in the temples, and farmers began their journey to the Nile's edge. But all life revolved around one man, the pharaoh, the center of the universe. After his meal, the pharaoh stepped out onto the balcony of his palace. The golden sunlight bathed his figure in brilliance. Below him stretched the grand capital, temples, statues, and the shining blue of the Nile winding through the heart of Egypt. Thousands of citizens gathered near the palace gates, their heads bowed in reverence. When the pharaoh appeared, a wave of cries filled the air. Life, prosperity, health to the living Horus. The chant rolled through the streets like thunder. The pharaoh raised his hand in silent acknowledgement. He knew these people saw him not as a man, but as a god walking among them. And yet, deep within his heart, he felt the heavy burden of their faith. To be worshipped was power, but to be divine was isolation. Still, he played his part flawlessly. He descended from the balcony, surrounded by guards clad in gold and white linen. Musicians led the way, their drums echoing like a heartbeat through the city. The pharaoh was on his way to the Temple of Amun to perform the daily ritual that sustained Egypt's harmony. As his chariot rolled through the streets, children threw flowers, women sang hymns, and priests knelt with sacred offerings. The smell of burning myrrh and lotus filled the air. Statues of gods lined the processional road. Horus with his falcon head, Anubis with the jackal's face, and mighty Osiris, the lord of the afterlife. Every eye watched as the living god passed. Every heart beat with awe. This was not just a ruler. This was the beating heart of civilization itself. When the pharaoh entered the temple, the high priest and dozens of acolytes fell to their knees. The sacred drums ceased. Silence fell once again. Inside the holy chamber, the pharaoh approached the golden statue of Amun-Ra. The ritual began, the offering of Ma'at, the eternal balance. The pharaoh presented gifts of bread, wine, and incense, symbolizing life, order, and purity. As he placed them before the statue, he spoke words that only a pharaoh could utter. "I am your son, born of your light. Through me, your people live. Through me, the Nile flows. Through me, Egypt stands eternal." The priests bowed lower, for in that moment, it was believed that Amun-Ra himself spoke through the pharaoh. As the ceremony ended, sunlight broke through the temple ceiling, falling directly upon the pharaoh's crown. The people outside cheered, believing they had just witnessed the blessing of the gods. But behind the divine mask, the pharaoh stood quietly, his gaze distant, his thoughts deep. For all his glory and power, he was still a man walking among shadows, haunted by the knowledge that even gods must one day face the sands of time. As he turned to leave the temple, a strange feeling lingered in his heart, a whisper from the future, a secret from the gods, and a shadow from the past. The day had only just begun, but the story of his life, the daily life of a pharaoh in ancient Egypt, was far greater, darker, and more mysterious than the world could ever imagine. The throne of eternity. The golden chariot rolled into the palace courtyard just as the blazing sun reached its highest point above Thebes. The air shimmered with heat. The sand outside glowed like molten glass, yet within the royal walls, the temperature dropped into a heavy stillness, the stillness of reverence. Trumpets of silver announced the pharaoh's return from the temple of Amun. Servants bowed until their foreheads touched the marble floor. Priests lowered their torches in respect. And at the heart of this silence, the living God walked among men. The pharaoh's footsteps echoed softly across the great hall. Each sound was measured, controlled, almost divine. He made his way to the hall of judgment, where the fate of Egypt's people was decided. A chamber vast enough to hold hundreds, its walls alive with carved hieroglyphs of victory, sacrifice, and eternal rule. At the far end stood the throne of Horus, forged from gold, silver, and ebony. Its arms were shaped like the wings of the falcon god himself. Upon it rested the symbol of absolute power, the crook and flail, representing mercy and punishment. The pharaoh took his seat. Immediately, the room came alive. Viziers, scribes, generals, and high priests stepped forward in perfect order. Each bowed deeply, their eyes fixed on the floor. None dared to meet his gaze. Even the highest-born noble trembled in the presence of the one believed to hold the breath of Ra within his chest. The first to speak was the vizier of the south, an elderly man draped in linen and gold. "My divine lord," he began, "the floods of the Nile have been generous this year. The harvest will be abundant. The farmers await your blessing to begin the season of sowing." The pharaoh nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the painted ceiling, a sky of lapis lazuli embedded with stars of silver. "Let the fields of Egypt thrive," he declared. "Let every home have bread, and every child sleep without hunger. The gods are pleased, and so am I." The vizier bowed deeply. The scribes immediately began writing his words on fresh papyrus scrolls, the pharaoh's decree, immortalized for the ages. Next came a general, his armor gleaming like polished bronze. He stepped forward, kneeling before the throne. "My king, we bring word from the eastern desert. A caravan of traders seeks passage to Babylon. They request your protection." The pharaoh's expression hardened. Trade was the lifeblood of Egypt, but also its danger. "Grant them passage," he said, "but let our guards accompany them. The wealth of Egypt must never fall into foreign hands." The general bowed, his forehead touching the floor. "Your will is the will of the gods," he said softly. For hours the court continued, petitions, reports, offerings, and decrees. Each decision was absolute. Each command was law. The pharaoh's voice carried across the hall like a sacred wind, shaping the destiny of an empire that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. But beneath the splendor of his throne, there was always tension. Behind every bowed head, there were whispers. The priests guarded the temples. The generals guarded the borders. But who guarded the truth? The pharaoh's closest advisors knew that beneath the marble floors of the palace ran secret tunnels, chambers, and archives where the true knowledge of Egypt was kept. Knowledge of the stars, medicine, and the afterlife, wisdom so powerful it was said to come directly from the gods. As the council ended, the high priest approached the throne. His voice was calm, yet heavy with something unsaid. "My lord, the time approaches for the ritual of Ra's journey. The people await your words at sunset." The pharaoh rose from his throne, the golden light catching on his collar of jewels. "Prepare the offerings," he commanded. "Tonight, Egypt will remember who commands the sun." He turned and began walking through the long corridor that led to his private chambers. The guards followed, silent as shadows. On the walls, The stories of his ancestors glimmered in torchlight, pharaohs who had ruled before him, their eyes forever watching, judging. In his private chamber, the pharaoh removed his heavy crown and looked upon it quietly. The weight of it was not only gold, it was time, destiny, and solitude. Outside, the people worshipped him as a god. Inside, he was a man carrying the burden of eternity. He stood before a polished bronze mirror, seeing his reflection, young, strong, flawless. Yet behind those eyes lay exhaustion. Each decision, each ritual, each decree chipped away at the man within the god. A faint knock broke his thoughts. It was the royal architect, summoned earlier that morning. "My lord," the man said, bowing low, "the foundations of the new temple near the valley have been laid. The design follows your divine vision. Within its walls, the story of your reign will be carved for eternity." The pharaoh approached him slowly, the soft sound of his sandals echoing on the marble. "Eternity," he repeated, a word spoken easily, but heavy to bear. He gazed toward the window where the sun was beginning its descent, blood red against the horizon. "Tell me, builder of dreams," the pharaoh said, "when you carve my story, what will you write of me? Will I be remembered as a god, or as a man who ruled too long beneath the weight of heaven?" The architect hesitated. His voice trembled. "You will be remembered as both, my lord, the bridge between gods and men." The pharaoh smiled faintly, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of something darker, doubt. That evening, as the sky turned to crimson and gold, the pharaoh made his way toward the great temple once more. The streets were lined with thousands of people. They carried torches, flowers, and offerings. The priests led the chants. The drums beat in slow rhythm with the setting sun. At the temple gates, the high priest awaited him. "The time has come, O son of Ra," he said. "The journey of the sun must be renewed." The pharaoh raised his arms toward the heavens. "Ra descends to the underworld," he proclaimed, his voice echoing like thunder through the valley. "And I, his son, light his path." The priests bowed low. They began to chant, ancient words older than Egypt itself. Flames of oil rose high, casting the temple in a fiery glow. The golden statue of Ra shimmered in the heat, as though alive. The pharaoh stepped forward holding a golden torch. He touched it to the sacred flame, symbolizing the sun's eternal life. The crowd roared in devotion, believing that through this ritual the sun would rise again, tomorrow. But within that divine moment, the pharaoh felt something unsettling. As the firelight flickered across his face, he saw, for just an instant, the faint image of a shadow behind the statue. A figure, cloaked and silent, watching him. His heart tightened. The air around him felt heavy. Was it a trick of the light, or had someone dared to trespass upon the house of the gods? He said nothing. The ceremony continued flawlessly. But in his mind, the thought lingered. A shadow in the temple, a whisper in eternity. When the ritual ended, the pharaoh returned to his palace under the veil of night. The stars shone bright above him, mirrored in the waters of the Nile. Yet for the first time, the divine ruler of Egypt felt the chill of unease. He climbed to his private balcony, gazing upon the city that worshipped him. The lights of thousands of torches flickered below like stars fallen upon the earth. "Life, 5,100 years ago," he murmured to himself, "and still the same sun watches us all. But even gods are watched in return." The wind whispered softly through the columns. The sound of distant drums faded, and somewhere deep within the palace walls, the faint sound of footsteps echoed, then vanished. The pharaoh stood motionless, his eyes fixed upon the darkness beyond the Nile. Tomorrow would bring another sunrise, another ceremony, another illusion of divinity. But tonight, Egypt's god-king felt human, and the sands of time were beginning to shift. Secrets. Within the golden walls, the sun had long since set over the horizon of Thebes. The city lay draped in silence, broken only by the distant hum of the Nile and the occasional call of a night bird. But inside the royal palace, the night was far from quiet. The corridors flickered with torchlight, shadows stretching across walls covered in painted hieroglyphs, gods, battles, and the birth of the world itself. At the center of it all lay the heart of power, the private chambers of the pharaoh, the place where no ordinary soul was ever allowed to enter. Here, the god-king shed his divine mask and became what the world was never meant to see: a man. The pharaoh sat alone in his inner chamber, the glow of oil lamps shimmering against gold and marble. Before him, on a polished table of alabaster, lay maps of his empire, letters from generals, and sealed scrolls from the temples. But his eyes were fixed on something else entirely: a small amulet carved from black stone, glowing faintly in the lamplight. It was the Eye of Horus, gifted to him by the high priest on the day of his coronation. The priest had whispered that it would watch what even the gods cannot see. For years it had rested in his possession, an object of beauty, a symbol of power. But tonight, under the cold breath of darkness, it seemed alive. He reached for it slowly, his fingers brushing the ancient carvings. And for a fleeting moment, the flicker of movement, a shadow passed across the surface, as if something inside the stone had shifted. The pharaoh's heartbeat quickened. He placed the amulet back upon the table, breathing deeply. He was not a man who believed in fear, but in the world of gods and tombs, fear was not always human. A soft knock broke his thoughts. "Enter," he said, his voice calm but commanding. The door opened, and the royal consort stepped inside. The great queen of Egypt, draped in silks as white as moonlight. Her eyes, lined with kohl, shimmered like onyx. Behind her followed two handmaidens, who stopped at the threshold and bowed low. "My lord," she said softly, "the high priest has requested an audience. He says it concerns the temple offerings, and a matter of secrecy." The pharaoh's gaze hardened. "At this hour?" "Yes, my king. He says it cannot wait till dawn." He rose from his seat, his golden jewelry catching the lamplight. "Bring him," he ordered. Moments later, the heavy doors opened again. The high priest entered, his white robes trailing behind him like mist. He bowed deeply before the pharaoh, touching the floor with his forehead. "Speak," the pharaoh commanded. "My divine lord," the priest began, his voice echoing softly through the chamber, "the temple's inner sanctum, the chamber where we keep the oldest relics, has been disturbed." The pharaoh's eyes narrowed. "Disturbed? By whom?" "We do not know, my lord," the priest said, "but the guards report that the sacred seal of Ra was broken. Nothing appears stolen, yet something feels changed. The air inside that chamber, it is wrong." The pharaoh stepped closer, the air around him heavy with silence. "What relics were kept there?" "The oldest scrolls, my lord," the priest whispered, "those said to be written in the time before kings, when gods still walked among men." The pharaoh turned toward the window, staring into the moonlit city below. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, "Summon my guards. At dawn, I will see this chamber myself." The priest bowed and left. The queen watched him go, her face pale under the flickering light. When they were alone, she spoke gently. "My king, the gods test you. These are omens. You must rest." He turned to her, his eyes distant. "The gods do not test those they fear," he said. "They test those they envy." She bowed her head, saying nothing more. When she left, the pharaoh walked toward a hidden doorway behind a tall curtain of gold-threaded linen. He pressed his palm against a stone panel, and with a faint grind, the wall opened to reveal a passage, narrow, dark, and ancient. Few knew of this place. It was the Hall of Secrets, a corridor that ran beneath the palace and led to chambers known only to the pharaoh and his ancestors. He took a torch and descended the stone steps slowly. The air grew cooler, heavy with the scent of dust and old incense. The walls around him were carved with symbols so ancient that even his scribes could not read them. At the end of the passage lay a circular room, its ceiling painted like the night sky, with golden stars gleaming even in the dim light. In the center stood a single stone pedestal, and upon it rested the scroll of light, said to hold the wisdom of the gods. The pharaoh approached it, his footsteps echoing softly. For generations, every ruler had come here in secret to learn the truths of power, time, and death. He touched the scroll's cover, cold, smooth, ageless. Unrolling it slightly, his eyes fell upon lines written in symbols older than hieroglyphs. He could not understand all of it, but one phrase burned clear in the dim light. He who seeks the truth of the sun must walk where no light can reach. The pharaoh frowned. Was this the same message hidden in the priest's words? The same darkness that stirred in the temple? He rolled the scroll shut and turned away. But before he could leave, a sudden rush of wind extinguished his torch. Darkness, complete and suffocating. He stood still, listening. The faint sound of footsteps echoed somewhere in the passage behind him. Soft, slow, deliberate. "Who is there?" he commanded, his voice echoing off the stone walls. No answer, only the sound of breathing. Close, then gone. For the first time, in years, the pharaoh felt the icy hand of fear upon his heart. He drew the torch to his lips and blew upon the ember. The flame flickered weakly to life. The passage was empty. But on the floor before him, freshly carved into the stone, was a single hieroglyph, the symbol of Anubis, god of the dead. The pharaoh's breath caught. No one dared mark that symbol in his palace. No mortal hand could have reached this place without divine guidance. He turned and left quickly, sealing the hidden door behind him. Back in his chamber, dawn was already creeping across the sky. The queen had fallen asleep beside a window, the city still quiet below. The pharaoh stood for a long while, staring at the amulet on his table, the black stone eye of Horus. Its surface was calm again, lifeless. But deep within, something glimmered. A faint spark, like the blink of an unseen eye. He whispered softly to himself, "If the gods are watching, then what have they seen?" Outside, the first light of the new day spilled across the desert. Another day in the life of the pharaoh had begun. A day of power, ritual, and mystery. But beneath the gold and glory, Egypt's living God was beginning to uncover something darker than time itself. The night of prophecy. The sun had set once again over the great capital of Egypt, but this night was not like others. The air itself felt heavy, as if the gods were watching from the stars above, holding their breath. Within the royal palace, every torch burned brighter, every guard stood tense, because tonight, the pharaoh, the living God, would descend to the temple of eternity, a sacred place beneath the sands, where only kings and high priests were ever allowed to step. Rumors whispered through the corridors that the temple held a prophecy so ancient even the gods feared it. And tonight, the pharaoh would learn its meaning. The golden doors of the inner palace opened. Drums echoed slowly, their sound deep and haunting. The pharaoh stepped forward, wearing a cloak of shimmering gold, his crown glinting under the torchlight. Behind him walked the high priest, face hidden beneath a hood, carrying a staff tipped with crystal. As they passed through the halls, every servant, every soldier bowed their heads low, whispering prayers. For to see the Pharaoh walk toward the temple of eternity was to witness a moment few mortals ever lived to remember. The procession wound down through tunnels carved beneath the palace, ancient corridors older than any dynasty. The walls were covered in carvings of stars, serpents, and eyes that seemed to move when touched by the flickering light. Finally, they reached a massive stone door carved with the faces of gods. The high priest stepped forward and pressed his hand to the wall, whispering words in a language lost to time. The air vibrated. The door trembled, then slowly began to open with a deep rumbling sound. A burst of cold air swept through, carrying the scent of sand and old incense. Beyond the doorway lay the Temple of Eternity, a circular chamber vast and silent, with pillars of black granite rising like the trunks of ancient trees. In the center stood a stone altar covered in golden dust. Above it, suspended from invisible threads, floated an orb of faint blue light, pulsing like a heartbeat. The Pharaoh stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the glowing sphere. "What is this?" he asked quietly. The high priest bowed deeply. "The heart of the prophecy, my king. It is said to hold the memory of the first sunrise, when the world began." The Pharaoh circled the altar slowly. "You told me of a disturbance, that the temple seal was broken." "Yes, my lord," the priest said softly. "And since then, the orb has grown brighter. The ancient ones are restless." The Pharaoh turned sharply. "Restless?" The priest lifted his gaze. "There are whispers in the wind. The scrolls speak of a night when the divine blood will awaken, and the sun will choose its heir once again." The Pharaoh frowned. "Speak plainly, priest." The high priest hesitated. Then, stepping closer, he said in a trembling voice, "My king, there is a prophecy. It tells of the Pharaoh who will defy the gods, and in doing so, bring the age of men to its end." The words echoed through the chamber, heavy as stone. The Pharaoh's jaw tightened. "Do you suggest I am that Pharaoh?" The priest bowed deeply, voice trembling. "I speak only the words of the scrolls, divine one. But the signs, the broken seal, the awakening of the orb, the eye of Horus that glows in your chamber, they all point to the same truth." The Pharaoh took a slow step toward him. "Truth?" he said coldly. "Or fear?" Before the priest could answer, the blue orb pulsed brighter, once, twice, then exploded in a blinding flash of light. Both men shielded their eyes. The ground shook violently, dust falling from the ceiling. When the light faded, the Pharaoh stood frozen, staring at the altar. Upon it now lay something new, a golden mask, shaped like the face of a god, eyes hollow yet burning with faint fire. The priest gasped. "Ra's mask," he whispered. "It appears only when the gods have chosen." The Pharaoh stepped closer, his reflection dancing in the golden surface. "What happens if I wear it?" The priest hesitated. "No man should. It is said that whoever wears it will see beyond the veil, into the realm of the gods themselves." The Pharaoh stared at the mask. "Then I will see what they hide." "My king, no!" the priest cried. "It is forbidden." But the Pharaoh had already lifted the mask. The golden metal was cold as ice. Slowly, he placed it upon his face. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a rush of sound, like the roar of the desert wind. His vision blurred. The chamber faded. He stood now in another world, a place of endless sand and fire. The sky burned red, and giant figures moved across the horizon. Gods of Egypt, vast and terrible, their forms shifting like smoke. He saw Ra, the sun god, riding across the heavens in his chariot of flame. He saw Anubis, guardian of the dead, standing beside a river of souls, and beyond them a dark figure cloaked in shadow, taller than mountains, faceless yet watching. The pharaoh tried to speak, but his voice was swallowed by the wind. The faceless figure raised a hand and a deep voice thundered in his mind. "You wear what is not yours, mortal god. The crown you hold was never meant for man." The pharaoh fell to his knees. "I am chosen by Ra himself. Egypt is mine by birth and by blood." The voice rumbled again. "You are but the echo of the first king. The day you forget humility, Egypt will forget you." A blinding light consumed him. When he awoke, he was back in the temple, lying on the floor. The priest knelt beside him, trembling. "My king, the gods, what did they show you?" The pharaoh's face was pale, his eyes distant. Slowly, he rose to his feet. "They showed me truth," he whispered. "A truth men were never meant to see." He turned to the altar. The mask was gone. Only the faint blue light remained, pulsing weakly, fading with every beat. The priest bowed low, fear written across his face. "My lord, what do we do?" The pharaoh walked toward the exit, his golden cloak trailing behind him. "Seal this place," he said quietly. "Let no man enter again." As they emerged into the cool night air, the first hint of dawn began to paint the horizon. But the pharaoh did not look at the sunrise. He looked at his own hands and saw faint streaks of gold glowing beneath his skin, as if the light of the gods had marked him forever. He clenched his fists. Something within him had changed. He was still pharaoh, but now a part of him belonged to something far older. And from that moment on, Egypt itself began to change. The Nile's waters grew unpredictable. The priests whispered of omens, and in the dreams of the people, the gods began to speak once more. The golden age of Egypt was trembling, and the man who ruled it had seen the shadow of its end. The fall of the divine king. The days that followed were unlike any Egypt had ever seen. The great river Nile, lifeblood of the kingdom, began to whisper strange songs in the wind. Priests claimed they heard voices rising from beneath the water, and above the temples, the sun burned with unnatural brilliance, as if Ra himself was watching and waiting. The pharaoh had not spoken since that night in the Temple of Eternity. He walked through his halls in silence, his golden crown gleaming, but his eyes distant, as though he saw a world that no one else could. Servants avoided his gaze. The high priest prayed endlessly, afraid of what had been unleashed. Each night, when the palace slept, the pharaoh would stand upon the balcony overlooking the Nile. He could see faint lines of light beneath his skin, still glowing, the divine mark that would not fade. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he heard the gods whispering his name. At first, it was like a distant song, but slowly the whispers turned into words, commands. Build what will last beyond the sand. Leave behind the proof of eternity. And so, the pharaoh gave a decree that would change Egypt forever. He commanded that a monument be built, a pyramid unlike any ever imagined, a structure that would pierce the sky and touch the realm of the gods. Thousands of workers were gathered from across the kingdom, architects, masons, slaves, and soldiers. The desert thundered with footsteps and chants as the first stones were laid. The people believed it was to honor the gods, but only the pharaoh knew the truth. It was to defy them. The high priest watched in silence, his heart heavy. He had seen the light in the pharaoh's eyes, the same glow as the orb, the same fire that had once burned in the heavens, and he knew the prophecy was unfolding. "Your Majesty," the priest said one evening, kneeling before the Pharaoh, "you are building not a monument, but a gate. Do you not fear what lies beyond?" The Pharaoh turned slowly, his face calm but cold. "The gods showed me their power," he said softly. "Now they will see mine." The priest bowed his head. The scrolls warned of this moment, that when man dares to equal the gods, the sun itself will turn its face away. The Pharaoh stepped closer, his voice low and sharp. "Then let the sun bear witness. I will not bow to voices that hide behind clouds and fire." The priest said nothing more, but that night, as the torches burned across the building site, he wept, for he knew Egypt was walking into the shadow of its own glory. The last sunrise years passed. The pyramid grew, its stones glowing golden beneath the sunlight, its shadow stretching across the sands like a mark of destiny. Men died building it. Their bones mixed with dust, their sweat became part of the desert. But still, they worked, because the Pharaoh's will was law. And then one dawn, after years of silence, the sky trembled. It began as a low hum, rising from the earth itself. Birds scattered. The workers froze. A beam of golden light shot from the top of the half-finished pyramid into the heavens. The Pharaoh, standing at its base, lifted his arms. "Ra!" he called out. "You gave me your light. Now witness its return." The pyramid's tip glowed brighter, until even the sun seemed to dim before it. A thunderous sound echoed, and the earth shook violently. The high priest rushed forward, shouting, "Stop this, my king! You are breaking the balance!" But it was too late. The light exploded into the sky, forming a great eye of fire, the eye of Ra, staring down upon Egypt. For a brief, blinding moment, all time seemed to stop. The workers screamed. The Nile turned crimson under the reflection of the burning light, and then silence. When the smoke cleared, the pyramid stood completed, perfect, timeless, eternal. But the Pharaoh was gone. Only his golden staff lay at the base, still warm to the touch. The high priest fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He looked up at the blinding structure before him and whispered, "The gods have taken their son home." The people mourned for weeks, but none could find the Pharaoh's body. His tomb remained empty, yet the pyramid pulsed faintly at night, as if something within still breathed. The eternal king's centuries passed. Dynasties rose and fell. The desert claimed the cities, but the pyramid remained, unbroken, untouched, its stones whispering to the wind. Travelers who ventured near spoke of strange lights dancing along its surface at dusk. Some swore they heard the sound of footsteps within, and those who entered never returned. The high priest's final writings, found generations later, revealed a chilling truth. He wrote, "The king did not die. He crossed beyond the veil into the realm of the gods. He waits there, watching, until the day men once again seek the power of heaven." And deep beneath the pyramid, in a chamber unseen by time, the Pharaoh sits upon a golden throne. His skin glows faintly, like sunlight through sand. His eyes, calm, divine, endless. Before him, the same blue orb from the temple of eternity floats, still pulsing softly. A whisper fills the darkness, the voice of Ra himself. "You wanted eternity, my son. Now you shall have it." The Pharaoh closes his eyes. The sands above shift, the stars turn, and the wind carries his name across the endless desert. The people have forgotten his face. But the stones remember. The pyramid stands, not as a tomb, but as a beacon. A reminder that once, 5,100 years ago, a man dared to walk among gods, and almost became one.